The paradox of death. Imagine standing in a Cretaceous forest 75 million years ago. You hear it before you see it. A high-pitched shriek that cuts through the humid air like a blade. Your instinct tells you to look up, to scan the canopy for the massive predator you know must be coming. You're searching for the Tyrannosaur, the apex hunter, the thing that should terrify you. You're looking in the wrong direction. The real danger is at your feet. A shadow flickers across the forest floor, no bigger than a turkey, weighing less than your family dog. Its eyes lock onto yours with an intelligence that shouldn't exist in something so small. In that frozen microsecond, you realize three terrible truths. It's not alone. It's already calculated your speed, and you have approximately 4 seconds before the pack strikes. This isn't the dinosaur from the movies. This isn't the monster you were taught to fear. This is something far worse. A killer so efficient, so perfectly engineered for slaughter, that size became irrelevant. A predator that proved the most dangerous equation in natural history. Lethality doesn't scale with mass. Welcome to the world of the small theropods, the chicken-sized assassins that may have been the most successful predators in Earth's history. We've been lied to. Not deliberately, perhaps, but the lie persists nonetheless. Embedded in every museum display, every blockbuster film, every children's book about prehistoric life. The lie is simple and seductive. Bigger means deadlier. For over a century, paleontology has worshipped at the altar of gigantism. We measure success in tons. We rank predators by skull length. We build our entire narrative of Mesozoic life around the titans. Tyrannosaurus rex, Giganotosaurus, Spinosaurus. As if the story of predation begins and ends with animals that could swallow you whole. But what if we've been reading the fossil record backward? What if the most efficient killers weren't the ones that shook the earth with each footstep, but the ones you never heard coming at all? Consider this. Tyrannosaurus rex, the supposed king of dinosaurs, lived for approximately 2.5 million years before extinction. Impressive, certainly, but small theropods, the dromaeosaurs, the troodontids, the compsognathids, dominated their ecosystems for over 90 million years. They survived the Jurassic-Cretaceous transition. They radiated into dozens of distinct species. They conquered every continent. And here's the truly unsettling part. They may have killed more large dinosaurs than T-Rex ever did. The evidence has been hiding in plain sight for decades, scattered across dig sites from Mongolia to Montana, preserved in the frozen moment of ancient violence. Bite marks too small for tyrannosaurs, scratches arranged in patterns that speak of coordinated attacks, bone beds where herbivores 10 times the size of their attackers died in clusters, their skeletons bearing the signature wounds of pack predation. Science is finally catching up to what the rocks have been screaming. Size was never the advantage we thought it was. Let's talk about Velociraptor mongoliensis, not the Jurassic Park monster, but the real animal. Strip away the Hollywood inflation, the exaggerated proportions, the fantasy. What you're left with is something far more interesting and, in many ways, far more terrifying. Velociraptor stood about knee-high to an average human. Fully grown, it weighed roughly 15 kilograms, 33 pounds. You could carry one if you were strong and foolish. Its skull was longer than your hand, but narrower than your wrist. By every metric we traditionally use to measure predatory capacity, it should have been nearly harmless to anything larger than a rabbit. It wasn't. In 1971, a Polish-Mongolian expedition to the Gobi Desert uncovered what would become known as the Fighting Dinosaurs specimen, one of the most important fossils ever discovered. Preserved in sandstone, frozen in their final moment, were two animals locked in mortal combat: Velociraptor and Protoceratops, a sheep-sized herbivore with a parrot-like beak and a protective frill. The scene tells a story written in bone. The Velociraptor's killing claw, that famous sickle-shaped talon on its second toe, is embedded in the Protoceratops' throat, buried to the base. The herbivore's beak is clamped around the raptor's arm, breaking it in what must have been its final act of defiance. They died together, predator and prey, locked in a struggle that neither would escape. But here's what makes your blood run cold. Protoceratops was 3 times heavier than Velociraptor. 3 times. The predator punched so far above its weight class that the fight shouldn't have been remotely close. Yet there they are. And you have to ask yourself, which one was winning when the sand buried them both? The Velociraptor's claw was already at the throat. To understand why small theropods were so devastatingly effective, we need to talk about biomechanics. We need to talk about the way evolution can pack lethality into a frame that weighs less than a Thanksgiving turkey. Start with the killing claw. Every dromaeosaur, the family that includes Velociraptor, Deinonychus, and Utahraptor, possessed an enlarged, sickle-shaped claw on the second toe of each foot. When walking, they held this claw retracted, lifted off the ground to keep it razor-sharp. When attacking, they could extend it through nearly 120 degrees of rotation, turning their foot into a biological switchblade. But the claw wasn't for slashing. That's another Hollywood myth. In 2005, paleontologist Phil Manning conducted a series of experiments using a mechanical raptor leg to test how these claws actually functioned. The results were unambiguous. The claws were stabbing weapons, designed for penetration, not laceration. The curved shape wasn't for cutting through flesh, it was for anchoring into it. Think about that for a moment. These animals had evolved spring-loaded grappling hooks for feet. The killing technique becomes clear when you reconstruct the biomechanics. A velociraptor would leap onto its prey, and make no mistake, these animals could jump astonishing heights, with leg proportions similar to modern roadrunners, and drive those claws deep into the body cavity. The curve meant they locked in, couldn't be shaken loose. Then the predator would begin a process paleontologists call controlled descent. Using their claws as pitons, they would climb down the prey's body, each placement of those hooked talons opening new wounds, causing fresh bleeding, inducing progressive shock and blood loss. They didn't need to kill you quickly. They just needed to hold on while you died. But the most disturbing aspect of small theropod predation wasn't physical. It was cognitive. We can measure intelligence in extinct animals through a metric called the encephalization quotient, or EQ, the ratio of brain size to body size, corrected for metabolic needs. Modern humans have an EQ of about 7.5. Chimpanzees clock in around 2.5. Most dinosaurs? Between 0.1 and 0.5. Troodon, a slender, bird-like predator from late Cretaceous North America, had an EQ of approximately 5.8. Read that again. Troodon, an animal that stood waist-high and weighed as much as a large turkey, had a brain-to-body ratio approaching that of modern primates. Its brain case shows expanded regions associated with problem-solving, spatial reasoning, and sensory integration. Its eyes were enormous, forward-facing, with binocular vision and potentially the ability to see in near total darkness. Troodon wasn't just smart for a dinosaur. It was smart, period. And it hunted in packs. We know this from trackways discovered in Montana and Alberta. Dozens of Troodon footprints moving in parallel, maintaining formation, exhibiting the kind of coordinated movement that speaks to communication and tactical planning. We know it from bone beds where juvenile hadrosaurs, duck-billed dinosaurs, died in groups, their remains scattered in patterns consistent with ambush predation by multiple smaller attackers. Here's the nightmare scenario that emerges from the fossil evidence. Imagine a pack of animals, each roughly the size of a large dog, with the problem-solving capacity of an ape, the sensory acuity of an owl, and weapons evolved specifically for anchoring into flesh. They can plan, they can coordinate, they can hunt in darkness when your vision fails and theirs excels. They can learn. Let's conduct a thought experiment. You're a paleontologist examining a mass death assemblage, a site where multiple animals died together and were fossilized in close proximity. You find the remains of 5 adult Edmontosaurus, each weighing 3 to 4 tons, all dead within the same depositional layer. What killed them? Traditional paleontology looks for the apex predator. Where's the T-Rex? Where's the evidence of the big killer? But look closer. The bones show damage, lots of it. Small puncture wounds, clustered around the legs, the flanks, the throat. Scratches in groups of 3, spaced exactly the distance of small theropod claws. Bite marks too numerous to count, none individually lethal, but collectively catastrophic. The hadrosaur's leg bones show stress fractures consistent with falling, with being unable to run, with progressive failure of muscular control as blood loss accumulated. This wasn't one predator. This was coordinated pack hunting by dozens of small theropods working together to bring down prey 20 times their individual size. Death by 1,000 cuts, orchestrated with tactical precision. And here's what should make you reconsider everything you think you know about Mesozoic predation. These kill sites are everywhere once you start looking for them. Montana, Alberta, Mongolia, China, Argentina. The same pattern repeated across continents and tens of millions of years. The small killers weren't opportunistic scavengers living in the shadow of the giants. They were the dominant predators, and the giants were simply the ones we noticed first, because their bones were too big to miss. Tyrannosaurus rex gets the museum exhibits. It gets the movie franchises. It gets to be the face of predatory dinosaurs in the public imagination. But Velociraptor, Troodon, Deinonychus, and their kin? They get something far more impressive. They get to have been the most successful predators in the history of terrestrial vertebrates. They survived longer. They radiated wider. They killed more efficiently. And they did it all while being small enough that most animals probably didn't see them as threats until it was far, far too late. We've spent over a century building our understanding of prehistoric life around the assumption that the biggest animals were the most dangerous. The fossil record is now forcing us to admit we had it backward. The real apex predators weren't the ones that hunted alone and relied on raw power. They were the ones that hunted in packs, used their intelligence as a weapon, and turned their small size from a disadvantage into the ultimate evolutionary edge. In the next chapter, we'll dive deeper into the evolutionary timeline, tracing how these killers emerged, why they stayed small, and what evolutionary pressures forged them into such efficient killing machines. We'll meet Compsognathus, the pretty jaw that may have been the most abundant predator in Jurassic Europe. We'll explore the arms race between prey and predator that made size irrelevant. And we'll confront an uncomfortable question. If small theropods were this successful, this adaptable, this intelligent, what would have happened if they'd survived the asteroid? What would our world look like if the chicken-sized killers had inherited the Earth? The birth of the small assassins. The story of the small killers doesn't begin with Velociraptor or Troodon. It begins much earlier, in the shadow of catastrophe, in a world still recovering from the greatest mass extinction event in Earth's history. 251 million years ago, the Permian period ended in fire and poison. Volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia released enough carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide to acidify the oceans, collapse food chains, and kill approximately 96% of all marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates. This was the Permian-Triassic extinction, the event paleontologists call the Great Dying. When the ash settled and the survivors crawled from their refuges, they inherited an empty planet. The dominant predators of the Permian, the gorgonopsids, massive saber-toothed synapsids that looked like crosses between wolves and reptiles, were extinct. The apex herbivores were gone. The old rules no longer applied. This was when the dinosaurs' story began. Not as world conquerors, but as opportunists. Small, agile, bipedal archosaurs that could exploit niches the old giants had left vacant. And here's the crucial detail that sets the stage for everything that follows. The first dinosaurs were all small. Not coincidentally small, but necessarily small. The devastated ecosystems of the early Triassic couldn't support large-bodied animals. Food was scarce. Competition was brutal. Survival favored efficiency over power, speed over strength, cunning over size. The small theropods weren't a deviation from some larger ancestral form. They were the template. They were the original dinosaur body plan, refined by 20 million years of post-apocalyptic selection pressure into something lean, fast, and lethal. By the late Triassic, approximately 230 million years ago, the dinosaurs had begun their rise to dominance. But they were still small. Most species ranged from the size of a chicken to the size of a large dog. Coelophysis, one of the most abundant predators of its time, stood less than a meter tall at the hip and weighed perhaps 15 to 30 kilograms. Fossilized in the thousands at Ghost Ranch, New Mexico, Coelophysis provides our first clear window into small theropod behavior. The Ghost Ranch bone bed is extraordinary. Hundreds of Coelophysis skeletons jumbled together, preserved in a single catastrophic flood event. All ages represented: juveniles, subadults, full adults. And here's what tells the story. They died together, but they weren't a herd. The bone distribution suggests they were already feeding on something when the flood hit, swarming over a carcass or perhaps engaged in active pack hunting. Look at the skeletal anatomy, and you see the blueprint for all future small theropods already in place. Hollow bones. Not just hollow, but with internal struts arranged like the structural supports in modern aircraft wings, maximizing strength while minimizing weight. Long, powerful legs with proportions that scream sprinter. A lightweight skull packed with curved, serrated teeth designed not for crushing bone like later tyrannosaurs, but for cutting flesh in rapid, repeated bites. Coelophysis could run. It could turn on a dime. It could accelerate from 0 to 40 kilometers per hour in seconds. And it hunted in groups large enough to overwhelm prey significantly larger than itself. This wasn't a primitive precursor to real predatory dinosaurs. This was already a perfected killing machine. The body plan was so successful that evolution barely needed to modify it for the next 160 million years. The Jurassic period, beginning 201 million years ago, saw the dinosaurs truly explode in diversity. This was when the giants emerged, the long-necked sauropods that would dominate the herbivore niches, the first of the large theropods like Allosaurus and Ceratosaurus. The Mesozoic world we picture in our minds, the landscape of titans, was taking shape. But pay attention to what else was happening in the underbrush, in the fern prairies, in the cycad forests where the giants couldn't effectively hunt. Compsognathus longipes, pretty jaw, emerges in the fossil record of late Jurassic Europe, approximately 150 million years ago. If you've heard of this animal, it's probably as a footnote, the smallest known dinosaur, mentioned in passing before moving on to more impressive creatures. That's a catastrophic underestimation of its importance. Compsognathus was the size of a chicken. An adult specimen measured roughly 1 meter from nose to tail tip and weighed between 2.5 and 3.5 kilograms. You could hold one in your arms like a house cat. Its skull was delicate, almost bird-like, with large orbits that held eyes capable of exceptional visual acuity. Its arms were short but functional, tipped with two-fingered hands bearing small but sharp claws. The specimen we know best, discovered in Bavaria in the same limestone quarries that yielded Archaeopteryx, preserves something extraordinary: its last meal. Inside the ribcage, exactly where the stomach would have been, paleontologists found the complete skeleton of a small lizard, Bavarasaurus. The lizard was swallowed whole, head first, in the manner of modern predatory birds. But that's just one specimen. The real story of Compsognathus emerges when you look at its geographical distribution and the frequency with which its remains appear in the fossil record. Compsognathus fossils show up across what was then a scattered archipelago of islands in the Tethys Sea, modern-day southern Germany and southern France. Multiple specimens, multiple age classes, found in marine sediments that represent coastal environments. This wasn't a rare animal. This was an abundant predator, common enough that specimens regularly ended up washed into the sea and preserved. Think about what that means. For every Compsognathus that died in circumstances that allowed fossilization, already a 1 in a million chance, there must have been thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, living animals. Compsognathus may have been the most numerous predatory dinosaur in late Jurassic Europe. Now here's where it gets interesting. At the same time Compsognathus was thriving in Europe, similar small theropods were appearing across the globe. Ornitholestes in North America, Sinosauropteryx in China. These weren't closely related species, they represent parallel evolution, different lineages converging on the same successful body plan. Small size, lightweight build, high metabolism, speed over power, teeth designed for slicing rather than crushing. Why? What made this particular combination so successful that evolution kept rediscovering it? The answer lies in energetics and ecology. Large predators are metabolically expensive. A Tyrannosaurus needed to consume roughly 100 kilograms of meat per week just to maintain its body mass. That's one adult hadrosaur every 10 days or so. Miss a kill and you're burning through your reserves. Miss several kills and you're starving. Large predators live on the knife's edge of caloric balance. Small predators have it easier. A Compsognathus needed perhaps half a kilogram of food per day, achievable by catching lizards, insects, small mammals, fish, eggs, or juvenile dinosaurs. The prey base was essentially unlimited. Starvation was nearly impossible. Population densities could reach levels no large predator could sustain. But there's more. Small predators reproduce faster. A Tyrannosaurus reached sexual maturity at approximately 18 to 20 years of age. Compsognathus probably reached maturity in 2 to 3 years. That's an order of magnitude difference in reproductive rate. An order of magnitude difference in how quickly a species can adapt to changing conditions, how quickly it can recover from population crashes, how quickly it can exploit new opportunities. Small theropods weren't just successful predators. They were evolution's rapid response team, constantly diversifying, constantly adapting, filling every available niche. The fossil record of the Jurassic shows us something fascinating and slightly disturbing. As sauropods grew larger, reaching sizes of 50, 60, even 80 tons, small theropods didn't disappear. They thrived. You'd expect an arms race. You'd expect predators to get bigger to match the growing prey. And that did happen. We get Allosaurus. We get Torvosaurus. Eventually, we get the Tyrannosaurs. But the small theropods persist, diversify, speciate faster than their giant cousins. Why weren't they outcompeted? Because they weren't competing for the same resources. The giants hunted the giants. But the small theropods had discovered something the large predators couldn't exploit: vulnerability windows. Every large herbivore goes through a juvenile phase. Every sauropod that eventually weighs 40 tons starts life weighing 5 kilograms. There's a period, sometimes years long, when these animals are exactly the right size for small theropod predation. The adults are too large to bother defending every individual juvenile. The juveniles are too small for large predators to waste energy on. It's a perfect niche, and the small theropods owned it completely. Trackways from the Morrison Formation in North America tell the story. Large sauropod prints, Brachiosaurus or Camarasaurus, moving in a herd formation. Scattered among them, smaller sauropod tracks, juveniles staying close to the adults. And surrounding the herd, dozens of small theropod prints, shadowing the group, waiting for an opportunity. The giant herbivores couldn't escape the small predators. They could only try to minimize losses. It was a 100-million-year siege, and the attackers never gave up. But the true revolution in small theropod lethality was still coming. It would emerge in the early Cretaceous, approximately 125 million years ago, in what is now northeastern China. This is when the dromaeosaurs, the raptors, appear in the fossil record with their full arsenal of adaptations. And this is when small theropods stop being just successful and start being genuinely terrifying. Microraptor gui, discovered in 2003 in Liaoning province, is one of the most completely preserved dinosaurs ever found. The fine-grained sediments of the ancient lake beds captured everything: bones, feathers, soft tissue outlines, even remnants of coloration preserved in melanosomes. We know more about Microraptor than we know about many living species. It was 77 centimeters long, weighed less than a kilogram, and had 4 wings. 4 wings. Long feathers on its arms, yes, but also on its legs, creating a second pair of airfoils. Modern analysis suggests Microraptor was capable of powered flight, though probably not sustained flapping flight like modern birds. Instead, it likely used a combination of gliding and burst-powered flight, launching from elevated perches to attack prey or escape danger. Imagine being a small mammal in Cretaceous China. You're foraging on the forest floor, unaware that 10 meters above you, a feathered predator has locked onto your position. It doesn't make a sound. It doesn't need to run you down. It simply folds its wings and drops like a stone, extending those sickle claws at the last possible moment. You never see it coming. But Microraptor had something even more disturbing in its arsenal. Stomach contents from multiple specimens preserved complete skeletons of small vertebrates, fish, birds, mammals, even other small dinosaurs. But it's not just what Microraptor ate that's significant. It's how it hunted. Several specimens preserve evidence of small gastroliths, stomach stones, identical to those found in modern predatory birds. These stones aren't for grinding plant material. They're for breaking down bone, for extracting maximum nutrition from prey by crushing and pulverizing skeletal material in the stomach. Microraptor wasn't just catching prey. It was consuming it completely, bones and all, extracting every possible calorie. This is the feeding strategy of an animal that lives at such a high metabolic rate that wasting food is literally not an option. This is the ecology of a predator that burns through calories so fast it needs to hunt almost continuously. Microraptor wasn't a bird that occasionally ate meat. It was a flying, killing machine that never stopped hunting. The early Cretaceous explosion of small theropod diversity wasn't limited to China. Across the globe, new species were appearing, each with its own specialized adaptations for predation. Buitroraptor in Argentina, a long-snouted form suggesting piscivory, fishing in shallow waters. Austroraptor in the same region, larger, more robust, but still only 2 meters long and probably pack hunting. Bambiraptor in North America, small, agile, with proportionally enormous eyes, suggesting nocturnal hunting capabilities. The pattern is clear. Small theropods were radiating into every available niche, developing specialized hunting strategies, pushing the boundaries of what a small predator could accomplish. Size wasn't holding them back. If anything, small size was becoming increasingly advantageous as the Cretaceous period progressed. Because something else was happening in the Cretaceous that would change everything. The prey was getting smarter. Herbivorous dinosaurs of the Cretaceous were not the lumbering, dim-witted creatures of the Jurassic. Hadrosaurs had complex social structures, vocal communication, and possibly even rudimentary language. Ceratopsians formed defensive formations when threatened. Ankylosaurs developed armor that made them nearly invulnerable to conventional predation. The arms race between predator and prey was escalating. And the small theropods responded, not by getting bigger, but by getting smarter and faster and more coordinated. This is when pack hunting truly becomes dominant in the fossil record. This is when we start seeing evidence of tactical complexity that rivals modern social predators. This is when the small killers became genuinely apex, not through individual power, but through collective intelligence. In the next chapter, we'll explore the golden age of the raptors, the late Cretaceous, when Velociraptor, Deinonychus, and Troodon perfected the art of cooperative predation. We'll examine the fossil evidence for pack behavior, the biomechanics of coordinated attacks, and the terrifying possibility that these animals might have been capable of learned behaviors and cultural transmission of hunting techniques. We'll also confront the question that haunts paleontology. Were these animals truly intelligent? Or are we projecting our own social mammalian instincts onto creatures that were fundamentally alien. The answer, as we'll see, might be more disturbing than either alternative. The Golden Age of Terror. The year is 1964. A paleontologist named John Ostrom is working in the Cloverleaf Formation of Montana, carefully excavating what will become one of the most significant dinosaur discoveries of the 20th century. He's found the skeleton of a new theropod, not particularly large, perhaps 3 meters long, weighing around 70 kilograms. But there's something about the feet that stops him cold. The second toe on each foot bears a claw unlike anything seen before in the fossil record. Not the straight, robust claws of tyrannosaurs, not the simple curved talons of earlier theropods. This claw is 12 centimeters long, wickedly curved, and appears to have been held off the ground when the animal walked. It's a retractable killing weapon, and its implications will revolutionize our understanding of dinosaur behavior. Ostrom names the animal Deinonychus anteropus, terrible claw. But the name undersells what he's actually discovered. This isn't just a new species. It's evidence of a completely different kind of predator, one that will force science to reconsider everything it thought it knew about dinosaur intelligence, behavior, and lethality. The late Cretaceous, from 100 to 66 million years ago, was the golden age of the dromaeosaurs. This is when small theropods reached their evolutionary peak, when the combination of physical adaptations and cognitive capacity produced predators so efficient that they may have exerted more selective pressure on prey species than all the large theropods combined. This is when the chicken-sized killers became truly terrifying. Let's start with Deinonychus itself, because understanding this animal is crucial to understanding everything that follows. The first thing you notice when examining Deinonychus' skeletal remains is the tail. Rigid, inflexible, wrapped in ossified tendons that turn the posterior half of the body into a single, solid unit. This isn't a tail for balance in the traditional sense. This is a dynamic stabilizer, a counterweight that allowed Deinonychus to make turns at high speed that would have torn apart less specialized predators. Modern biomechanical analysis suggests Deinonychus could execute a 180-degree turn at running speed without slowing down. Think about that. Imagine trying to escape this predator by dodging. You cut left, running as fast as your legs will carry you, certain you've broken its attack angle. It pivots without breaking stride, and now it's not behind you anymore. It's already cutting across your new path, anticipating where you'll be in 2 seconds rather than where you are now. That's not hunting by persistence or overwhelming power. That's hunting by prediction and superior maneuverability. That's the behavior of an animal that understands motion, trajectory, and tactical positioning. But the tail served another purpose, one that becomes clear when you reconstruct how the killing claw actually functioned in live action. A Deinonychus attack wasn't a simple leap and stab. It was a complex, multi-phase maneuver requiring split-second timing and extraordinary balance. Phase 1. The approach run, accelerating to maximum speed, estimated at 40 to 50 kilometers per hour, comparable to a modern ostrich. Phase 2. The leap, launching the body into the air while maintaining stability through micro-adjustments of that rigid tail. Phase 3. The strike, extending both legs forward, driving those sickle claws toward the target with the full momentum of the body behind them. Phase 4, and this is the terrifying part, the grip, where those claws penetrate flesh and lock in place, transforming the predator from a projectile into an anchored parasite that the prey cannot dislodge. The tail wasn't just for running and turning, It was the stabilizer that made the entire aerial attack possible. Deinonychus was essentially a living ballistic weapon, and the tail was its guidance system. Deinonychus wasn't hunting alone. We know this not from a single dramatic fossil like the Fighting Dinosaurs, but from something more subtle and, in many ways, more convincing: the statistical pattern of fossil deposition. In the Cloverleaf Formation, where Ostrom made his original discovery, Deinonychus remains consistently appear in association with Tenontosaurus, a herbivorous ornithopod roughly the size of a cow. Not occasionally, consistently. Multiple sites, multiple individuals, same pattern. Deinonychus skeletons found scattered around Tenontosaurus carcasses, often with the herbivore showing evidence of extensive damage from small theropod teeth and claws. Here's what makes it statistically significant. Tenontosaurus weighed approximately 1,000 kilograms, 1 metric ton. Deinonychus weighed 70 kilograms. That's a 14-to-1 mass ratio. A solitary Deinonychus attacking a Tenontosaurus is roughly equivalent to a German shepherd trying to bring down an adult moose. It's theoretically possible if the predator gets extremely lucky, but it's not a viable hunting strategy. It's suicide. Yet the fossil association persists. Deinonychus was regularly, habitually hunting prey over 10 times its own body mass. The only explanation that makes ecological and energetic sense is pack hunting, multiple individuals coordinating their attacks to overwhelm prey that no single predator could handle. But how coordinated were these packs? Were we looking at simple mob feeding, multiple predators drawn to the same target by instinct? Or something more sophisticated? The answer comes from the distribution pattern of Deinonychus skeletal remains at kill sites. They're not randomly scattered. They're positioned around the Tenontosaurus carcass in a pattern that suggests role differentiation. Some at the hindquarters, where the powerful legs of the prey could deliver lethal kicks. Others at the flanks, the safest attack position. Several at the neck and head, the most dangerous position, but also the most tactically critical. This isn't mob feeding. This is coordinated assault, with different pack members taking different roles. This is the fossil signature of complex social hunting behavior, the kind of behavior that, in modern animals, requires communication, memory, and the ability to learn and teach tactics. Deinonychus wasn't just smart, it was collaborative, and that changes everything. Now shift your perspective to the other side of the Cretaceous world. The Gobi Desert of Mongolia, approximately 75 million years ago, was not desert at all, but a landscape of sand dunes and seasonal lakes, subject to catastrophic sandstorms that could bury entire ecosystems in minutes. These sandstorms created the fossil deposits we mine today, animals preserved in the act of living, frozen in behavioral moments that would normally never fossilize. This is where we meet Velociraptor mongoliensis in its full ecological context. The Fighting Dinosaurs specimen we discussed in Chapter 1 is famous, but it's not alone. Multiple Velociraptor skeletons have been recovered from the Geoducta Formation, and their positions tell stories. Here's a juvenile, buried in mid-sprint, its leg proportions suggesting it could have outrun a racehorse. There's an adult, preserved with what appears to be the remains of a pterosaur in its stomach, evidence that Velociraptor was hunting in 3 dimensions, attacking flying prey either by leaping or by climbing. Another specimen shows evidence of a healed fracture to the arm. This animal survived a significant injury and continued to hunt successfully, which suggests either pack support or scavenging behavior during recovery. But the most significant discovery from the Gobi isn't a single spectacular specimen. It's a bone bed discovered in 2007 at a site called Tugrikien-Shire. Multiple Velociraptor individuals, multiple age classes, preserved together in what appears to have been a communal den or nesting site. The implications are staggering. Social structure, extended parental care, possibly multi-generational group cohesion. Modern paleontology is extremely cautious about making behavioral inferences from limited fossil data. We've learned the hard way that spectacular narratives often collapse under closer scrutiny. But when you have multiple lines of evidence, pack hunting signatures, communal death assemblages, healed injuries suggesting group support, prey selection patterns that require cooperation, the cumulative case becomes difficult to dismiss. Velociraptor wasn't a solitary ambush predator. It was a social pack hunter with complex behavior patterns that may have included cooperative care of young, collaborative hunting strategies, and possibly even rudimentary teaching of hunting techniques to juveniles. In other words, Velociraptor was behaving in ways we typically associate with mammals, not reptiles, with wolves and lions, not lizards and crocodiles. But if Velociraptor was intelligent, it was nothing compared to what was evolving in late Cretaceous North America. Troodon formosus, the animal we mentioned briefly in Chapter 1, deserves a much closer examination because it represents something genuinely unprecedented in the fossil record. A non-mammalian animal that may have approached primate-level cognitive capacity. The evidence begins with neuroanatomy. CT scans of Troodon skulls reveal a brain case with several remarkable features. First, the total volume. Approximately 30 to 50 cubic centimeters, which doesn't sound impressive until you account for body size. Troodon weighed roughly 50 kilograms. That gives it an encephalization quotient, brain mass relative to body mass, higher than any other dinosaur and approaching the EQ of some modern primates. But it's not just size. The shape of the brain case reveals functional specialization. Massively enlarged optic lobes, suggesting visual processing capacity far beyond what's normal for reptiles. Expanded cerebral hemispheres, the regions associated with higher cognitive functions in modern animals. A relatively large cerebellum, indicating sophisticated motor control and coordination. This is the brain architecture of an animal that could process complex visual information, execute precise physical movements, and potentially engage in problem-solving and planning behaviors. The sensory apparatus matches the brain. Troodon eyes were enormous, proportionally as large as owl eyes, forward-facing for binocular vision, with sclerotic rings suggesting the ability to focus rapidly at varying distances. The orbits face slightly upward and forward, the ideal orientation for looking up into trees or tracking aerial prey. Night vision was almost certainly exceptional, possibly rivaling or exceeding modern nocturnal predators. Then there's the hearing. Inner ear structures preserved in several specimens show elongated cochlear regions consistent with enhanced auditory sensitivity, particularly to higher frequencies. Troodon could hear sounds prey animals make when trying to move quietly: the rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs, the high-pitched breathing of small mammals. This is sensory equipment for hunting in low-light conditions, for detecting prey that's trying to hide, for tracking movement in cluttered environments where visual hunting alone isn't sufficient. This is the sensory suite of an apex nocturnal predator. But the most compelling evidence for Troodon intelligence comes from ichnology, the study of trace fossils, particularly footprints. In 1997, paleontologists working in Alaska discovered a trackway site that preserves something extraordinary. Dozens of Troodon footprints, clearly made by multiple individuals, moving in coordinated parallel lines across what had been a mudflat 70 million years ago. The gait pattern is consistent, the spacing between individuals is maintained, and the direction of travel is synchronized. This is the trace fossil evidence of a pack moving in formation. But here's where it gets truly interesting. The trackway shows a moment of behavioral change. About halfway through the preserved section, the parallel lines converge. The footprints suddenly become chaotic, and then they spread out again in a new pattern, a semicircular distribution. Something made the pack stop, regroup, and change formation. The most parsimonious explanation. They detected prey, communicated about it, and shifted from travel mode to hunting mode. The semicircular spread is consistent with an encirclement strategy, one of the most sophisticated hunting behaviors known in modern pack predators. You can't teach encirclement tactics through instinct alone. It requires individuals to understand not just their own role, but the roles of other pack members. It requires communication about spatial positioning. It requires each individual to adjust their behavior based on what others are doing. It requires theory of mind, the ability to model what other individuals know and are planning to do. This is not simple cooperative behavior. This is coordinated tactical maneuvering. This is the kind of hunting sophistication we see in wolves, in lions, in orcas. And Troodon was doing it 70 million years before those mammals evolved. Let's talk about what all this means for Mesozoic ecology. For a century, we've conceptualized the Cretaceous food web with large theropods at the top. Tyrannosaurus was the apex predator, full stop. Everything else was either prey or scavenger, but the evidence increasingly suggests that's not how it worked. Large theropods like T-Rex were absolutely present, absolutely dangerous, and absolutely capable of killing nearly anything they could catch. But they were rare. Population studies based on fossil abundance suggest there might have been one adult Tyrannosaurus per 100 square kilometers of territory. They were top predators in the sense that nothing could kill them, but they weren't the dominant predatory force shaping prey populations. Small theropods, by contrast, were everywhere. For every Tyrannosaurus fossil we find dozens of Troodon and Dromaeosaur fossils. The population density was orders of magnitude higher, and these weren't scavengers picking up scraps. They were active, sophisticated pack hunters, targeting the same prey species the large theropods hunted, just using completely different strategies. Think about the actual mortality pressure on herbivorous dinosaurs. An adult Edmontosaurus had maybe a 1% annual chance of encountering a Tyrannosaurus, but it had a near 100% chance of encountering small theropod packs multiple times per season. Most encounters didn't end in death, but some did, and the cumulative mortality from small predators over a lifetime almost certainly exceeded the risk from large ones. The small theropods weren't living in the shadow of the giants. They were the primary selective force driving the evolution of herbivore defenses. The armor, the herd behavior, the vocal warning systems, the nursery colonies. These adaptations weren't primarily for protection from Tyrannosaurus. They were for protection from the packs of smart, fast, coordinated killers that hunted in darkness and never gave up. There's one more aspect of small theropod predation we need to address, and it's perhaps the most disturbing: the possibility of learned behavior and cultural transmission. In modern pack hunters like wolves and orcas, hunting techniques aren't entirely instinctive. Young animals learn by observation, practice, and instruction from experienced adults. Different populations of the same species develop different hunting strategies, regional cultures that persist across generations. Some wolf packs specialize in ambushing deer at river crossings. Others learn to hunt on frozen lakes where prey can't gain traction. These techniques are taught, not hardwired. Could small theropods have done this? The evidence is circumstantial but intriguing. We see variation in kill site patterns across different geographic populations of the same species. Deinonychus hunting behavior in Montana appears subtly different from Deinonychus behavior in Wyoming, based on wound patterns and carcass distribution. This could be genetic variation, different populations evolving slightly different instincts. Or it could be cultural variation, different packs learning different techniques and passing them down. We know some modern reptiles are capable of social learning. Crocodiles, despite their reputation as primitive creatures, can learn from each other's feeding strategies. Monitor lizards show rudimentary problem-solving and observational learning. If modern reptiles with relatively small brains can do this, what could a Troodon with its massive, highly structured brain accomplish? The frightening answer: possibly quite a lot. Possibly enough to develop regional hunting cultures, to innovate new tactics, to pass successful strategies to offspring, and to adapt rapidly to changing prey behavior. This isn't speculation about dinosaur civilization or anthropomorphizing intelligence. It's a straightforward question about behavioral plasticity and learning capacity. And the anatomical evidence suggests that at least some small theropods possess the neural hardware to support sophisticated learned behaviors. If true, it means these predators weren't just dangerous because of their physical adaptations. They were dangerous because they could think, learn, and improve their hunting success over time. They were dangerous because younger generations could benefit from the accumulated knowledge of older generations, building tactical sophistication across lifetimes. They were dangerous because they were, in a very real sense, getting smarter. By the end of the Cretaceous period, 66 million years ago, the small theropods had achieved something remarkable. They had persisted, essentially unchanged in their basic body plan, for over 160 million years. They had survived the transition from Jurassic to Cretaceous. They had watched larger predators rise and fall. Allosaurs replaced by Carcharodontosaurs, replaced by tyrannosaurs, while they remained constant, always present, always successful. They had colonized every continent. They had diversified into dozens of distinct lineages. Some became specialized for fishing, others for hunting in dense forests, still others for nocturnal predation or aerial pursuit. But they all retained that core architecture: lightweight, fast, intelligent, cooperative. They weren't the biggest predators. They weren't the strongest. They weren't the ones we built museums around. But by every objective measure of evolutionary success, longevity, diversity, geographic range, population density, ecological impact, they were the most successful predators in the history of terrestrial vertebrates. And then, in a geological instant, it all ended. In our next chapter, we'll explore the final days of the Cretaceous and the asteroid impact that would reset the terrestrial ecosystem. We'll examine which small theropods survived into the Paleocene and what happened to their lineages. But more importantly, we'll confront a counterfactual that haunts evolutionary biology. What if the asteroid had missed? What would a world look like where the small theropods didn't go extinct, where they had another 60 million years to continue evolving that extraordinary combination of speed, intelligence, and cooperative hunting. What would Troodon descendants look like today if they'd had the same evolutionary runway that led from primitive primates to humans? The answer might disturb you more than you expect. The asteroid that almost didn't matter. The date is approximately 66,040,000 years ago. The location is what will one day be called the Yucatan Peninsula, though no human exists yet to name it. The sky is clear, the air humid, the world utterly unprepared for what's about to arrive. An asteroid roughly 10 kilometers in diameter enters Earth's atmosphere at 20 kilometers per second. The kinetic energy of impact equals approximately 100 teratons of TNT, 2 million times more powerful than the largest nuclear weapon ever detonated. The explosion vaporizes the asteroid, the ocean, and the bedrock beneath, sending a column of superheated debris into the stratosphere that will circle the globe in hours. The shock wave flattens forests 1,000 kilometers away. The heat pulse ignites wildfires across entire continents. And the debris cloud that follows will block sunlight for months, perhaps years, triggering a collapse of photosynthesis that will starve the food chain from the bottom up. This is the Chicxulub impact, the extinction event that ended the age of dinosaurs and reset the evolutionary trajectory of life on Earth. Except that's not quite what happened. Because when we say ended the age of dinosaurs, we're being imprecise in a way that fundamentally misrepresents what the fossil record actually shows. The asteroid didn't kill the dinosaurs. It killed the large dinosaurs. And that distinction matters more than you might think. Let's look at what actually went extinct at the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary. All non-avian dinosaurs over 25 kilograms disappeared from the fossil record. The giant sauropods, gone. The ceratopsians, extinct. The hadrosaurs, vanished. Tyrannosaurus, Triceratops, Ankylosaurus, every one of the Mesozoic megafauna disappeared within a geological instant. But scan the fossil record below that 25-kilogram threshold, and something different emerges. Small dinosaurs, specifically small theropods, survived through the boundary in multiple lineages. We call them birds now, but at the time they were simply small feathered dinosaurs, ranging from sparrow-sized to turkey-sized, and they made it through the extinction event with their diversity largely intact. The question that should haunt every paleontologist: why did size matter so much? The answer lies in metabolic requirements and ecosystem collapse. Large animals need vast amounts of food. When the impact winter killed the vegetation, herbivores starved. When herbivores died, large carnivores followed. The entire food chain collapsed from both ends, and there was no way for multi-ton animals to bridge the gap. But small animals? They could survive on seeds, insects, small prey items, carrion, food sources that persisted even as the larger ecosystem imploded. Their lower absolute caloric requirements meant they could weather the crisis on a fraction of the resources. Size, which had been neutral or even advantageous in the Cretaceous, suddenly became a death sentence. Now here's the disturbing part. The small theropods we've been discussing, Velociraptor, Troodon, Deinonychus, were right on the edge of that survival threshold. They were small enough that their metabolic needs should have been manageable. They were intelligent enough to adapt their hunting strategies. They were behaviorally flexible enough to shift prey selection as availability changed. By every reasonable ecological prediction, they should have survived. They didn't. The fossil record from the earliest Paleocene, the period immediately following the extinction, is frustratingly sparse. This is exactly when we'd most like to have detailed information, and instead we get gaps, uncertainties, and tantalizing fragments that raise more questions than they answer. But here's what we do know. Several lineages of small theropods made it through the initial impact and its immediate aftermath. Fossil evidence from the Hell Creek Formation in Montana shows small dromaeosaurs, raptor family members, persisting for at least several thousand years into the Paleocene. Footprints in the Denver Basin of Colorado preserve what appear to be troodontid tracks dated to approximately 200,000 years after the impact. They survived the asteroid. They survived the impact winter. They made it through the initial crisis. And then, over the next few 100,000 years, they disappeared anyway. Why? What killed the survivors after they'd already survived the unsurvivable? The answer appears to be competition, specifically competition from an unexpected source. The extinction of large dinosaurs created an enormous ecological vacuum, and multiple groups of animals rushed to fill it. Mammals, which had spent 160 million years as mostly rat-sized nocturnal insectivores, suddenly began diversifying into new niches. Flightless birds, descendants of the small flying dinosaurs that survived, began experimenting with larger body sizes and ground-based predation. But the real competition came from the small theropods' own descendants. The birds that made it through the extinction weren't the sophisticated raptors and troodontids. They were generalist omnivores, animals that could eat seeds, insects, small vertebrates, basically anything they could fit in their beaks. When the dust settled and ecosystems began to recover, these generalists were perfectly positioned to radiate into new forms. The specialist predators, the ones with the killing claws and the pack-hunting behavior and the enormous brains, found themselves outcompeted by their own less specialized cousins. Evolution had favored the flexible generalists over the refined specialists, and the small theropods that had dominated the Cretaceous found themselves relegated to smaller and smaller ecological niches until eventually they vanished. The last Troodon probably died not in the fires of the impact, but in a Paleocene forest, outcompeted for food by early ravens and starlings, unable to maintain viable breeding populations as resources dwindled and territories shrank. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. But let's pause here and conduct a thought experiment. Let's imagine the asteroid missed. Let's imagine that particular chunk of rock passed Earth by a few thousand kilometers, a near miss in astronomical terms, and the Cretaceous world continued unchanged. What would have happened to the small theropods? This isn't idle speculation. This is a legitimate question in evolutionary biology. What were the trajectory and potential of these lineages if they'd been allowed to continue? And the answer is both fascinating and deeply unsettling. Consider Troodon as it existed in the latest Cretaceous. Brain-to-body ratio approaching primates, binocular vision, grasping hands with an opposable first finger, social behavior suggesting communication and possibly culture. These weren't primitive reptilian brains operating on pure instinct. These were sophisticated cognitive machines capable of learning, problem-solving, and behavioral flexibility. Now give that lineage another 60 million years of evolution, the same amount of time that separates the primitive primates of the early Paleocene from modern humans. What does Troodon become? Paleontologist Dale Russell explored this question in 1982 with his famous and controversial Dinosauroid hypothesis. He proposed that Troodon, if allowed to continue evolving under selection pressure for intelligence and manual dexterity, might have developed an upright posture, larger brain, reduced tail, and increasingly sophisticated tool use. His reconstruction looked disturbingly humanoid, which is why it was controversial. It seemed like anthropomorphic wishful thinking. But Russell wasn't being fanciful. He was extrapolating from actual evolutionary trends already visible in the Troodon lineage. The brain was already enlarging. The eyes were already forward-facing. The hands were already showing adaptations for manipulation. These weren't speculative traits. They were present in the late Cretaceous fossils. Russell simply asked, what happens if these trends continue? The problem with Russell's Dinosauroid is that it assumed convergent evolution toward a human-like form. But evolution doesn't have a goal, doesn't aim toward any particular outcome. Intelligence can evolve in many forms, and there's no reason to think intelligent Troodon descendants would look anything like humans. They'd probably look like Troodon, just more so. Larger brains, certainly, but still housed in elongated reptilian skulls with forward-facing eyes. More sophisticated hands, but still with the basic three-fingered theropod configuration. Longer arms, perhaps, if tool use became important. But the basic body plan, bipedal, tail-balanced, feathered, would likely remain. What changes is not the body, but the behavior. And this is where the thought experiment becomes genuinely disturbing. Modern humans achieved dominance through a combination of intelligence, social cooperation, and tool use. But we're also constrained by our mammalian heritage. We're relatively slow. We require lots of food. We're vulnerable to temperature extremes, and we have long generation times that slow adaptation. Troodon descendants would have different constraints. They'd be faster, much faster. Their metabolism would be more efficient. Their generation time would be shorter, allowing more rapid adaptation. And they'd have 160 million years of evolutionary history as pack hunters, far longer than any mammalian lineage has been cooperative. Imagine an intelligent species that evolved not from cautious omnivores, but from apex predators. A species where cooperation evolved not for food gathering or child rearing, but for coordinated hunting of dangerous prey. A species where the fundamental social structure is the hunting pack rather than the family unit. What kind of civilization does that produce? What kind of technology? What kind of ethics? We literally cannot imagine it because every intelligent species we know, humans, apes, elephants, dolphins, crows, evolved from non-predatory or omnivorous ancestors. We have no reference point for what intelligence looks like when it emerges from a lineage of obligate carnivores. But let's push the thought experiment further. Let's imagine not just one lineage of intelligent theropods, but multiple lineages evolving in parallel. Because that's what the Cretaceous record suggests would have happened. Troodon in North America, dromaeosaurs in Asia, troodontids in Europe, each lineage under similar selection pressures, each developing enhanced cognition and social complexity, but each doing it slightly differently due to different environmental contexts. In our world, humanity is the only intelligent species. We have no competitors, no equals, no one to negotiate with or war against except ourselves. But in a world where the asteroid missed, intelligence might have emerged in multiple species, multiple continents, creating a genuinely multi-species civilization, or multiple competing civilizations. Because remember, these are predators. Competition is hardwired. Territoriality is fundamental. The cooperative behavior that makes pack hunting possible doesn't necessarily scale up to interspecies cooperation. Modern wolf packs cooperate internally, but are violently territorial toward other packs. What happens when you have multiple species of intelligent predatory dinosaurs, each with Stone Age or Bronze Age technology, competing for resources on the same continents? The answer is probably warfare. Prolonged, sophisticated, strategic warfare between species that think differently, communicate differently, and have fundamentally different priorities. And here's the thing, they'd be good at it, frighteningly good. Because warfare is just hunting scaled up, and these species would have 100 million years of evolutionary refinement in coordinated tactical violence. Let's ground this speculation in what we actually know about intelligence and tool use in modern dinosaurs: birds. Because birds are the only surviving lineage of small theropods, and they provide our only window into what dinosaur intelligence actually looks like. Corvids, crows and ravens, are astonishingly intelligent. They make and use tools. They solve multi-step problems. They recognize individual human faces and hold grudges across years. They engage in what can only be described as play, sliding down snowbanks for apparent enjoyment. They hold funerals, where groups gather around dead crows, seemingly processing the information about mortality and danger. Some researchers argue that corvids demonstrate theory of mind, the ability to understand that other individuals have different knowledge and perspectives. And corvids have brains the size of walnuts. Their encephalization quotient is high, but their absolute brain size is tiny compared to Troodon. Yet they accomplish all this cognitive sophistication with neural hardware that's a fraction of what Troodon possessed. Parrots are even more remarkable. African gray parrots can learn vocabularies of over 100 words and use them in contextually appropriate ways. Not just mimicry, but actual communication. They understand abstract concepts like same, different, bigger, smaller, present, absent. They can count. They show empathy and emotional reciprocity. And they do this with brain structures that are fundamentally reptilian, not mammalian, proving that high intelligence doesn't require a mammalian-style cerebral cortex. If modern birds with tiny brains can do this, what could Troodon with its primate-sized brain have achieved? The honest answer is probably quite a lot more than we're comfortable imagining. Now, let's add one more layer to this thought experiment: time. Because if the asteroid had missed, we're not just talking about 60 million years of evolution, we're talking about 66 million years and counting, all the way up to the present day. In our timeline, mammals took over after the extinction, eventually producing humans who developed civilization approximately 10,000 years ago. In the alternate timeline where small theropods survived, when does theropod civilization emerge? Earlier? Later? Never? The uncomfortable truth is probably earlier, much earlier. Mammals had to start from scratch after the extinction. Early Paleocene mammals were small, primitive, and not particularly intelligent. It took tens of millions of years to evolve primates, then higher primates, then great apes, then hominids, and finally humans. The whole process from rat-sized insectivores to technological civilization took 65 million years. But Troodon in the late Cretaceous was already far along this trajectory. It already had the large brain, the binocular vision, the grasping hands, the social complexity. It didn't need to evolve these traits, it had them. It just needed to continue the trends that were already in progress. How long would it take? 10 million years? 20? There's no way to know, but there's a reasonable argument that intelligent tool-using theropods could have emerged sometime in the Eocene epoch, roughly 50 million years ago, which means they'd have had 50 million years to develop civilization, technology, and whatever comes after technology. For reference, humans have had approximately 10,000 years of civilization. Imagine having 5,000 times longer to develop, refine, and advance. Imagine what we might accomplish with 50 million years of continuous cultural evolution. Now imagine what intelligent predatory dinosaurs, species that think differently than we do, that have different values and priorities and cognitive architectures, might accomplish with that much time. There's a principle in evolutionary biology called convergent evolution. When different lineages face similar environmental pressures, they often evolve similar solutions. Wings evolve independently in insects, pterosaurs, birds, and bats. Eyes evolve independently dozens of times. Streamlined bodies for swimming evolve in fish, ichthyosaurs, dolphins, and penguins. So if intelligence is useful, and it clearly is, since it evolved in multiple mammalian lineages, it should evolve in other lineages too when conditions are right. The question isn't whether theropods could have become intelligent. The question is, were they already on that path when the asteroid hit? Look at the evidence. Troodon brain structure, dromaeosaur pack behavior, the sophisticated hunting strategies preserved in trackways and kill sites. The evidence for possible cultural transmission of learned behaviors. These animals weren't primitive reptiles operating on pure instinct. They were complex, behaviorally flexible, cognitively sophisticated predators. They were already intelligent by any reasonable definition. They just hadn't yet crossed the threshold to technology and civilization. But they were close, so close that another few million years might have been enough. The asteroid didn't just kill the dinosaurs. It killed an alternative trajectory for intelligent life on Earth. It terminated a 160-million-year-old lineage that was approaching something genuinely novel, a form of intelligence emerging from predatory pack hunters rather than social omnivores. We'll never know what they might have become. We'll never know what kind of civilization they would have built, what kind of art they might have created, what questions they would have asked about the universe. The asteroid made sure of that. But here's the final twist to this thought experiment, the detail that should make you genuinely uncomfortable. In the scenario where the asteroid missed and intelligent theropods evolved, what happens when they eventually develop space travel and start exploring other star systems? What happens when the galaxy's first intelligent species is not cautious, social, tool-using apes, but fast, efficient, pack-hunting predators with 50 million years of technological advancement? What happens when first contact isn't with a species that evolved from prey, but with a species that evolved from predators? In our next chapter, we'll return from speculation to evidence. We'll examine the actual evolutionary legacy of the small theropods, the birds that survived and eventually filled many of the niches their non-avian cousins once occupied. We'll look at modern predatory birds and ask, how much of the ancient theropod hunting sophistication survived? How much was lost? And we'll confront one final question. In a world where small theropods are extinct and only their bird descendants remain, are we actually safer? Or have we simply traded one kind of threat for another, more subtle and insidious form of predatory intelligence that we don't even recognize as dangerous? Because the raptors are still here. They just learned to fly. The survivors and their secrets. There's a bird outside your window right now. Perhaps it's a crow picking through garbage, or a hawk perched on a telephone pole, or even just a common pigeon strutting along the sidewalk. You barely notice it. It's part of the background noise of modern life, as ordinary and unremarkable as the sky itself. You're looking at a dinosaur. Not a distant descendant, not an evolutionary echo. A dinosaur, complete with the same basic skeletal architecture, the same hollow bones, the same three-fingered hands hidden inside those wings. The only real difference between that bird and Velociraptor is 66 million years of evolutionary modification and a healthy dose of size reduction. But here's what should truly disturb you. Many of those birds retained more of their predatory heritage than you might think. The intelligence is still there. The hunting instincts are still there. And in some lineages, the pack-hunting sophistication that made Cretaceous small theropods so terrifying, that's still there too. We live in a world haunted by the ghosts of the Mesozoic's most successful predators. And occasionally, in specific circumstances, those ghosts become terrifyingly solid. Let's start with the obvious survivors, the raptors. Not the dromaeosaurs, those went extinct, but the birds of prey, the hawks and eagles and falcons, the lineages that occupy the aerial predator niche today. Take the Harris's hawk, Parabuteo unicinctus, a medium-sized raptor native to the southwestern United States and Central America. Wingspan roughly 1 meter, weight around 700 grams, diet consisting mainly of rabbits, ground squirrels, and other small mammals. Unremarkable, you might think. Just another hawk. Except for one critical detail. Harris's hawks hunt in packs. This is almost unheard of in modern raptors. Birds of prey are typically solitary hunters, fiercely territorial, attacking other individuals of their own species on sight. But Harris's hawks form stable social groups of 2 to 6 individuals, usually a breeding pair and their offspring from previous years, and cooperate to bring down prey larger than any single hawk could handle alone. The hunting strategy is sophisticated. One hawk flushes the prey from cover. Others position themselves at likely escape routes. When the prey runs, it finds a hawk waiting. If it dodges, another hawk is already in position. The attack is coordinated, timed, each individual playing a specific role. And here's the critical part. Young hawks learn these techniques by observing experienced adults. This is cultural transmission, learned behavior, the same cognitive sophistication we saw in Cretaceous pack hunters. Harris's hawks aren't some bizarre evolutionary experiment. They're a remnant, a fossil behavior preserved in a modern lineage. They're showing us what small theropod pack hunting actually looked like, translated into an aerial context. And they're terrifyingly effective. Success rates for Harris's hawk group hunts approach 80%, far higher than solitary raptors achieve. The pack hunting strategy that made dromaeosaurs dominant in the Cretaceous still works, still confers massive advantages, still produces apex predators that punch far above their weight class. The raptors didn't forget how to cooperate. They just don't usually need to, because modern prey is smaller and easier to catch. But the capacity is still there, coded in behavior patterns that have persisted across 66 million years. But if you want to see the true legacy of small theropod intelligence, You need to look at corvids, the crows, ravens, and jays that most people dismiss as just birds. The cognitive capacity of corvids is genuinely staggering. Not impressive for a bird, staggering by any standard. Let me give you specific examples, documented in controlled scientific studies that demonstrate problem-solving abilities that rival or exceed many mammals. New Caledonian crows manufacture tools, not simple tools, sophisticated, multi-component tools that require planning and foresight. They select appropriate materials, modify them to specific shapes, and use them to extract food from difficult-to-access locations. They make hooks by bending wire. They craft barbed probes from specific plant species. They carry their tools from site to site, using them repeatedly across different contexts. But here's what's truly remarkable. They improve their tools across generations. Young crows learn tool-making from adults, but they don't just copy, they innovate. Tools become more refined, more efficient, more specialized over time. This is cumulative cultural evolution, the same process that drives human technological advancement, happening in birds with brains the size of walnuts. Corvids also demonstrate something called episodic-like memory, the ability to remember specific past events with contextual details about what, where, and when. They can plan for the future, saving food in multiple cache locations, and remembering not just where they hid items, but which locations contain the most valuable resources. They can even account for the possibility of theft, re-caching food if they notice another bird watching them hide it. This is theory of mind, understanding that other individuals have knowledge and intentions separate from your own. It's one of the hallmarks of higher intelligence, and corvids demonstrate it routinely. But the most disturbing corvid behavior, the one that most clearly echoes their Mesozoic predatory ancestry, is mobbing. Watch what happens when a crow discovers a hawk or owl in its territory. It doesn't flee. It doesn't hide. It calls, a specific alarm vocalization that brings other crows from hundreds of meters away. Within minutes, a dozen or more crows have assembled, and they begin a coordinated harassment campaign. They dive-bomb the predator from multiple angles, never quite hitting it, but coming close enough to be genuinely threatening. They vocalize continuously, a cacophony that prevents the predator from hunting by stealth. They maintain the attack for hours if necessary, following the predator if it tries to leave, refusing to let it rest or feed. This isn't panicked fleeing. This is coordinated tactical aggression against a larger predator, using numerical superiority and cooperation to neutralize a threat. This is pack behavior, refined by millions of years of evolution, deployed against enemies that could easily kill any individual crow, but can't handle the collective assault. And here's the truly unsettling part. Crows remember. Individual crows can recognize specific human faces and remember them for years. If a human captures or threatens a crow, that individual crow will mob that specific human whenever it sees them, and will teach other crows to mob that same person. The vendetta spreads through the local crow population, persisting even after the original crow dies. You're not just dealing with a smart animal. You're dealing with a species that holds grudges, teaches those grudges to others, and maintains cultural memory of threats across generations. That's not bird behavior. That's predator behavior, adapted from ancient theropod pack hunting strategies and weaponized against modern threats. Now let's talk about parrots, because they represent something different. Intelligence emerging not from predatory lineages, but from social complexity and dietary flexibility. The African gray parrot, Psittacus erythacus, demonstrates cognitive abilities that were thought to be uniquely human until quite recently. The most famous example is Alex, the gray parrot studied by Dr. Irene Pepperberg for 30 years until his death in 2007. Alex learned over 100 English words and used them not in simple mimicry, but in contextually appropriate communication. He could identify objects, colors, shapes, and materials. He understood concepts like same and different, bigger and smaller. He could count up to 6. He could combine words to describe objects he'd never seen before, calling an apple a bannery because it was a cross between a banana and a cherry in appearance. But the most remarkable moment came near the end of Alex's life, in one of the final experiments Dr. Pepperberg conducted. She was teaching Alex about the concept of zero, absence, nothingness. She would show him a tray of objects, ask, "How many blue blocks?" And when there were no blue blocks, the correct answer was none. Alex struggled with this initially. But then one day she asked him, "What color is the biggest?" while showing him objects of different sizes. Alex looked at the tray, looked at her, and said, 5. There was no object with 5 of anything. She asked again. Alex repeated, 5. It took her a moment to understand what Alex had done. The largest object was gray, the same color as Alex himself. Alex knew he was gray. He knew that 5 was the approximate position of gray on the color spectrum he'd been taught. And he used that number to communicate a color he didn't have a word for. That's not just word use. That's abstract reasoning, analogical thinking, creative problem solving under constraints. That's intelligence by any meaningful definition. And Alex's brain weighed approximately 12 grams. What does this tell us about the small theropods? What can we infer about Troodon and Velociraptor from the intelligence of their modern descendants? First, intelligence doesn't require mammalian brain architecture. Birds achieve cognitive sophistication with completely different neural structures than mammals use. They have no neocortex, the brain region mammals use for higher reasoning. Instead, they use a structure called the pallium, organized completely differently, but capable of supporting the same cognitive functions. This is crucial because it means the theropods didn't need to evolve mammal-like brains to achieve mammal-like intelligence. They could use their existing reptilian brain architecture, simply scaling it up and reorganizing it for enhanced processing. The fossil evidence suggests that's exactly what was happening in Troodon. Massive expansion of the pallial regions, reorganization for enhanced visual and spatial processing, all within a fundamentally reptilian skull. Second, tool use and problem solving don't require hands. Corvids manipulate objects with their beaks. Parrots use their tongues as precision instruments. Neither has the manual dexterity of primates, yet both demonstrate sophisticated object manipulation. The small theropods had hands, grasping, 3-fingered hands with mobile wrists and potentially opposable digits. They were better equipped for tool use than any modern bird, and modern birds are already capable of manufacturing sophisticated tools. Third, pack hunting and cooperative behavior persist across massive evolutionary timescales. Harris's hawks demonstrate that 66 million years of separation from dromaeosaurs hasn't erased the capacity for coordinated group hunting. The behavior remains latent, emerging when environmental conditions make it advantageous. The small theropods weren't doing anything that modern birds can't do. They were just doing more of it, more consistently, with larger brains and better physical equipment. But there's one more group of modern dinosaurs we need to discuss. one that demonstrates just how dangerous small theropods could be when environmental conditions were right. The terror birds. After the extinction, in the Paleocene and Eocene epochs, when mammals were still relatively small, a lineage of ground-dwelling predatory birds emerged in South America. We call them Phorusrhacids, terror birds, and they were the closest thing the Cenozoic produced to non-avian dromaeosaurs. The largest species, Kelenken guillermois, stood 3 meters tall and weighed approximately 250 kilograms. But it's the smaller species that are most relevant to our story. Animals like Patagornis marshii, roughly the size of Deinonychus, with massive skulls, powerful beaks, and long legs built for pursuit predation. These weren't scavengers. Trackways and skeletal evidence suggest they were active pack hunters, using speed and coordination to bring down prey. Their beaks were sharp and hooked, capable of delivering crushing blows or precise strikes to vital areas. Their legs were long and powerful, biomechanical analysis suggesting running speeds up to 50 kilometers per hour, faster than most mammals of their time. For approximately 60 million years, terror birds were the dominant predators in South America. They only went extinct when the Isthmus of Panama formed, connecting South and North America and allowing placental carnivores like cats and dogs to invade. Even then, they didn't go extinct because they were inferior predators. They went extinct because they were outcompeted by mammals that had evolved in more competitive environments. The terror birds showed us what could have been. They demonstrated that the small theropod body plan, upright posture, bipedal locomotion, powerful legs, reduced arms, could still produce apex predators in the post-dinosaur world. They were the Mesozoic's revenge, a lineage that remembered how to hunt like dinosaurs, even though the dinosaurs were gone. And they almost won. If continental drift had been slightly different, if the Americas had remained separated for a few million years longer, terror birds might have spread globally. We might be living in a world where the dominant land predators are still dinosaurs in all but name. Let's return to the present and ask a darker question. Are we safe from avian predators simply because modern birds are small? The answer is more complicated than you might think. Because size is relative to prey, and from the perspective of small mammals, birds, and reptiles, modern raptors and corvids are already terrifying apex predators. Consider what happens when you scale down. A falcon hunting a sparrow experiences the same relative size differential as a velociraptor hunting a protoceratops, a predator attacking prey 2 to 3 times its own body mass. The hunting techniques are similar: high-speed pursuit, precise strikes to vital areas, overwhelming force delivered with surgical precision. The falcon doesn't have a killing claw, but it has talons and a hooked beak that serve the same function. Now consider pack hunting behavior in smaller birds. Shrikes, also called butcher birds, are songbird-sized predators that cache their prey by impaling it on thorns. They hunt insects, small birds, lizards, and mammals up to the size of mice. Individual shrikes are formidable, but in some species, they form loose aggregations that mob larger predators or cooperatively defend territories. This is predatory behavior scaled to songbird size. and it's devastatingly effective within its ecological niche. The small theropods didn't need to be large to be dangerous. They just needed to be large relative to their prey and sufficiently intelligent to exploit cooperation. Modern birds demonstrate that both traits still exist in their lineages. The capacity for pack hunting survives. The intelligence survives. The predatory instincts survive. They're simply expressed in smaller packages, hunting smaller prey. But the fundamental behavioral architecture, the thing that made Cretaceous small theropods terrifying, remains intact. There's one final thought experiment we need to conduct, one that brings the entire discussion full circle. What if the size reduction that occurred after the extinction could be reversed? Evolution is not a one-way street. Lineages that became small can become large again if environmental pressures favor increased size. We've seen this repeatedly in the fossil record. Cope's rule, the tendency for lineages to evolve toward larger body sizes over time, operates across most animal groups. Birds evolved from small dinosaurs, became even smaller after the extinction, and then some lineages, like the terrorbirds, became large again. The capacity for size increase never disappears. It just waits for conditions that make it advantageous. So imagine a future, perhaps after humans go extinct, perhaps on another continent where humans never evolved, where environmental conditions favor larger predatory birds, where prey species increase in size and predator lineages respond by increasing their own size, where corvids or raptors begin an evolutionary trajectory back toward the body sizes their ancestors had in the Cretaceous. What happens when you combine Cretaceous body size with modern avian intelligence and 66 million years of evolutionary refinement? What happens when you scale up a crow to the size of Troodon, giving it the same brain-to-body ratio, but with absolute brain size large enough for genuinely sophisticated cognition? The answer is, you get something potentially more dangerous than the original Cretaceous predators, because you're not just recreating what existed before. You're creating something new. A predator that combines the physical adaptations of ancient theropods with the cognitive sophistication that modern birds have developed in the interim. Evolution doesn't repeat, it iterates. And the next iteration of intelligent predatory theropods, should it ever occur, would have 66 million years of additional optimization to draw from. Walk outside and look at the birds. Really look at them. Watch how they move, the quick, precise head movements tracking motion invisible to human eyes. Watch how they interact, the complex vocalizations, the social dynamics, the evidence of individual personalities and relationships. Watch how they hunt, the patience, the timing, the calculation in those black eyes. You're watching dinosaurs, not metaphorically, actually. The same lineage that produced Velociraptor and Troodon, refined by millions of years of additional evolution, compressed into forms small enough that we've learned to ignore them. We think we're safe because they're small. We think the age of predatory dinosaurs ended 66 million years ago. We think the real threats are extinct, preserved only in fossils and museum reconstructions. We're wrong. The small theropods never left. They just learned to fly, and we stopped recognizing them as dangerous. But the intelligence is still there. The pack-hunting instincts are still there. The predatory sophistication that made them the most successful hunters in Earth's history is still there, preserved in behavioral patterns that haven't changed fundamentally since the Cretaceous. In our final chapter, we'll synthesize everything we've learned and confront the biggest question. What does the success of small theropods tell us about evolution, intelligence, and the nature of apex predators? Why did the small killers succeed where the giants failed? And what lessons can we extract from 160 million years of predatory excellence that ended not in evolutionary failure, but in transformation? Because the small theropods didn't go extinct. They transcended, and their descendants rule the skies above us, 10,000 species strong, a living reminder that size was never what made them dangerous. It was everything else. The paradox of apex predation. There's a moment captured in the Hell Creek Formation, preserved in 66-million-year-old stone, that perfectly encapsulates everything we've learned. It's not dramatic. No fighting dinosaurs locked in mortal combat. No clear evidence of predation. Just a single footprint, small and three-toed, pressed into what was once mud and is now sandstone. The footprint measures 8 centimeters long. The stride pattern suggests the animal was moving quickly, not running, but certainly not casual. And here's what makes it significant. This footprint was made approximately 100,000 years before the asteroid impact, in sediments that also preserved Tyrannosaurus fossils, Triceratops remains, and the bones of the giant hadrosaurs that dominated the latest Cretaceous landscape. This small theropod, probably a troodontid, possibly even Troodon itself, was walking through a world of giants. Everything around it outweighed it by orders of magnitude. The herbivores could crush it with a single step. The large predators could swallow it whole. By every conventional measure of predatory success, this animal should have been irrelevant, a footnote in an ecosystem dominated by ton-scale megafauna. Instead, its lineage had already survived for 90 million years, had colonized every continent, and would be one of the only dinosaurian lineages to survive the extinction that killed everything else. That footprint is asking us a question. What does it actually mean to be an apex predator? We need to fundamentally reconsider how we think about predatory hierarchies. For a century, paleontology has operated under an assumption inherited from modern ecosystems. The food chain is a pyramid, with the largest predators at the top, smaller predators in the middle, and prey at the bottom. Tyrannosaurus sits at the apex because nothing hunted it, nothing threatened it, nothing challenged its dominance. But apex status isn't about individual combat prowess. It's about ecological impact, the degree to which a predator shapes the evolutionary trajectory of prey species and structures the ecosystem as a whole. By that measure, Tyrannosaurus wasn't the apex predator of the late Cretaceous. The small theropods were. Consider the selective pressures operating on herbivorous dinosaurs in the latest Cretaceous. What traits are being selected for? Size? Yes, to some degree. Larger animals are harder to kill. But there's a limit to how large you can get before the energetic costs become prohibitive. Armor? Absolutely. Ceratopsians and ankylosaurs are essentially walking fortresses. But armor is heavy and metabolically expensive. The traits that show up most consistently across late Cretaceous herbivores aren't defenses against large predators. They're defenses against coordinated pack attacks, herd behavior, vocal warning systems, sophisticated eyesight for detecting movement at a distance, extended parental care where adults protect juveniles. These aren't anti-tyrannosaur adaptations, they're anti-raptor adaptations. The small theropods were imposing a constant, relentless, selective pressure that large theropods couldn't match. A Tyrannosaurus might encounter a herd of hadrosaurs once a week. Small theropod packs encountered that same herd daily, testing defenses, probing for weakness, picking off stragglers and juveniles. Over millions of years, that constant pressure drives adaptation far more effectively than occasional encounters with apex predators. The small theropods shaped prey evolution. The large theropods just benefited from it. This raises a provocative possibility. Maybe the giants needed the small predators more than the small predators needed the giants. Large predators are metabolically constrained. They need enormous amounts of food, which means they need abundant prey, which means they need ecosystems that can support large herbivore populations. But what maintains those herbivore populations? What keeps them from overgrazing their food sources and collapsing their own populations? In modern ecosystems, predation pressure from multiple sources, large predators, small predators, disease, starvation, maintains herbivore populations below carrying capacity. Remove the predators and herbivore populations explode, overconsume vegetation, and crash. The predators aren't just taking advantage of prey abundance, they're creating the stability that allows prey populations to persist. In the Cretaceous, large theropods were too rare and too metabolically expensive to provide consistent population control. They took the largest, oldest, slowest individuals, valuable for the individual predator, but not particularly significant for population dynamics. The real population pressure came from small theropods hunting juveniles, attacking sick or injured individuals, and maintaining constant harassment that kept prey populations lean, alert, and below resource exhaustion levels. The small theropods weren't parasites on an ecosystem dominated by giants. They were the regulatory mechanism that made the entire system work. Remove them, and the ecosystem destabilizes. The giants collapse not because they're being outcompeted, but because the underlying structure that supports their prey base has disappeared. This might explain something puzzling about the extinction. Why giant theropods disappeared so quickly? It wasn't just that their direct prey went extinct. It's that the ecosystem structure that maintained prey populations, the constant predation pressure from small theropods, disappeared first, causing a cascade failure that eliminated prey species faster than starvation alone would predict. The giants didn't fall because the asteroid killed them directly. They fell because it killed the small predators first. And without the small predators regulating the system, everything else collapsed. But let's examine this from another angle: energetic efficiency. Because this is where the small theropod's advantage becomes mathematically undeniable. A Tyrannosaurus rex needed approximately 40,000 kilocalories per day to maintain its body mass. That's roughly 100 kilograms of meat every single day. Miss a successful hunt for a week, and you're in caloric deficit, burning through reserves. A single Tyrannosaurus required a territory of perhaps 100 square kilometers to support its food needs. And even then, survival was marginal. A Troodon, by contrast, needed perhaps 2,000 kilocalories per day, achievable through a single rabbit-sized mammal, a clutch of eggs, or several large lizards. Its territory could be a tenth the size. And here's the critical difference. A pack of 10 Troodon hunting cooperatively needed less total food than a single Tyrannosaurus, but could take down the same size prey through coordinated effort. Do the math. 10 Troodon consume 20,000 kilocalories daily, half what a Tyrannosaurus requires. But they're hunting as a unit, which means they can target the same hadrosaur that a Tyrannosaurus would hunt. The hadrosaur provides, let's say, 500,000 kilocalories total, enough to feed the pack for 25 days. One successful hunt per month sustains the entire group, with energy left over for reproduction, territorial defense, and other activities. A Tyrannosaurus needs to make a successful kill roughly every 5 days just to maintain caloric balance. It has no margin for error, no buffer for bad luck or injury or seasonal prey scarcity. The small theropods, hunting cooperatively, need one major kill per month and can supplement with small prey the rest of the time. This is why they succeeded. Not because they were individually more dangerous, they obviously weren't, but because their energetic efficiency allowed population densities that large predators could never sustain. For every Tyrannosaurus in a region, there might have been 50 to 100 small theropods. The sheer numerical advantage overwhelmed any individual superiority the giants possessed. Now let's talk about intelligence as a predatory adaptation, because this is where the small theropods demonstrate something truly extraordinary. Intelligence is metabolically expensive. Brain tissue consumes approximately 20% of resting metabolic energy in humans, despite being only 2% of body mass. For an animal operating on tight energetic margins, intelligence needs to provide survival benefits that outweigh its costs. For most large predators, raw power is cheaper than cognition. Why evolve an expensive brain when you can simply evolve bigger jaws? But for small predators, the calculation is different. You can't overpower prey through size. You can't simply rely on being faster or stronger. You need tactics, coordination, behavioral flexibility, all things that benefit from enhanced cognition. Intelligence becomes cost-effective when it's the only way to bridge the gap between your capabilities and your prey's defenses. This is why pack hunting and intelligence correlate so strongly across the animal kingdom. Wolves are smarter than bears. Dolphins are smarter than sharks. Lions are smarter than tigers. The cooperative hunters consistently show enhanced cognitive capacity because cooperation itself requires intelligence. You need to track what other pack members are doing, predict their actions, coordinate timing, communicate intent. The small theropods evolved intelligence not despite their size, but because of it. Their size made them vulnerable, made prey dangerous, made survival challenging. Intelligence was the solution, and once you're on that trajectory, once you're selecting for bigger brains and better problem solving, it becomes a runaway process. Smarter predators catch more food, survive better, reproduce more successfully. The next generation is slightly smarter on average. The cycle repeats for millions of years. By the late Cretaceous, Troodon had been on this cognitive escalation trajectory for 50 million years. That's an extraordinarily long time for selection pressure to operate. For comparison, the entire evolution of modern humans from our common ancestor with chimpanzees took only 6 to 7 million years. Troodon had 7 times longer to evolve enhanced cognition. The wonder isn't that Troodon was smart. The wonder is that it wasn't smarter than it was. It may have been approaching the maximum intelligence achievable without hands capable of complex tool use, without fire for cooking food to provide extra calories for brain growth, without all the cultural and technological adaptations that allowed humans to break through the cognitive ceiling. This brings us to perhaps the most profound question. What prevented the small theropods from achieving human-level intelligence? The answer might be nothing except time. They were on the trajectory. The brain was enlarging. The behavior was becoming more complex. The social structures were developing sophistication. All the prerequisites were falling into place. They just needed more evolutionary runway. And then a rock fell from the sky and terminated the experiment 65 million years early. But let's consider the alternative outcome, the thought experiment we've been dancing around throughout this entire exploration. Let's imagine the asteroid missed. Let's imagine the Cretaceous continued and Troodon had another 20 million years, another 50 million years, another 65 million years to continue evolving along its established trajectory. What happens when you give a pack-hunting predator with a primate-level EQ enough time to stumble into tool use? What happens when stone tools allow better food processing, which supports larger brains, which enable better tool-making, in the same positive feedback loop that drove human evolution? Here's what we know from the one example we have, ourselves. Humans went from stone tools to civilization in roughly 3 million years, from agriculture to space travel in 10,000 years, from computers to artificial intelligence in 70 years. Once you achieve a certain threshold of cognitive capacity and cultural transmission, advancement accelerates exponentially. Troodon was already most of the way there. It had the big brain. It had the social complexity. It had grasping hands, though not as sophisticated as human hands. It had binocular vision and excellent sensory processing. It lived in stable social groups, with evidence of cultural transmission. All it lacked was that one critical insight, the moment when an individual realizes that rocks can be shaped into tools, that tools can extend capability, that teaching tool use to others provides group advantages. Once that threshold is crossed, everything changes. How long would it take a Troodon descendant to cross that threshold? 1 million years? 10 million? We can't know. But the anatomical and behavioral prerequisites were already in place. The breakthrough was possible. It might even have been probable given enough time. Let's examine what this alternate history might have produced. Not the specifics, those are unknowable, but the broad strokes based on what we understand about Troodon biology and behavior. First, tool use would develop differently than it did in humans. Humans are persistence hunters who evolved endurance and dexterity. Our tools reflect that: weapons for throwing, containers for carrying, shelters for protection. We're builders and makers because our survival strategy required extensive preparation and planning. Troodon descendants would be ambush and pack hunters who evolved speed and cooperation. Their tools would reflect their hunting strategy: weapons for close-quarters combat, traps for channeling prey, signals for coordinating attacks. They'd probably develop sophisticated communication tools before developing agriculture, war technology before building technology, weapons before wheels. This isn't speculation about an alien psychology. It's extrapolation from evolutionary constraints. The cognitive toolkit you develop is shaped by the problems your ancestors needed to solve. Humans needed to solve endurance hunting, food storage, and child rearing during long maturation periods. Troodon descendants would need to solve cooperative hunting, pack coordination, and rapid exploitation of successful kills. Their technology would be sharp, efficient, elegant, but probably not comfortable. There's no evolutionary pressure for a pack-hunting predator to develop soft bedding or climate-controlled shelters or decorative art. Those traits emerge from social species that rely on long-term cooperation outside hunting contexts. Predators cooperate to hunt, but between hunts, they rest. They don't build. Or do they? Because here's where it gets truly interesting. Once intelligence crosses a certain threshold, it begins to reshape its own selection pressures. Humans didn't evolve to do calculus or write symphonies, but once we had sufficient general intelligence, those capabilities emerged as byproducts. Intelligence that's flexible enough to solve novel hunting problems is also flexible enough to solve problems in completely different domains. An intelligent Troodon descendant might start by making better hunting weapons, but that same intelligence, that same capacity for abstraction and planning, could be applied to shelter building, food storage, social organization, eventually art and mathematics and philosophy. The cognitive architecture doesn't care what problems it's solving, it just solves problems. But there's a darker possibility we need to confront. Humans developed ethics, cooperation, and large-scale social structures partly because we're evolved from social omnivores. We have empathy for group members, altruistic tendencies, instincts toward fairness and reciprocity. These traits emerged because our ancestors survived through cooperation outside predatory contexts. What kind of ethics does a species descended from pack-hunting predators develop? Do they have empathy? Do they value individual life? Do they cooperate outside hunting contexts, or is their entire social structure built around killing? Modern pack-hunting mammals like wolves and lions show us one possibility. They're highly social within the pack, with strong bonds between individuals, care for injured pack members, and grief responses when pack members die. But they're also completely ruthless toward anything outside the pack: rival groups, prey species, even their own offspring under resource stress. An intelligent species descended from Troodon might mirror this. Fiercely loyal to in-group, utterly indifferent or hostile to out-group. The ethics of the pack, scaled up to tribal or national levels. Cooperation within the group, not because cooperation is inherently valued, but because it improves hunting success. Competition between groups, not as political disagreement, but as fundamental existential conflict. This is disturbing because it suggests that certain kinds of intelligence, certain cognitive architectures, might be incompatible with large-scale cooperation or universal ethics. We assume intelligence leads to moral progress because that's the trajectory we've observed in human history. But human history is the history of social omnivores. The history of intelligent pack predators might look very different. Let's ground this speculation in observable reality by examining the closest modern analogs, the social predators that demonstrate high intelligence and cooperative behavior. Orcas, killer whales, are apex marine predators with brain-to-body ratios approaching human levels. They hunt cooperatively, use sophisticated tactics, teach skills to offspring, and demonstrate cultural variation between populations. Different orcapods use different hunting techniques, different vocalizations, essentially different languages that are learned rather than instinctive. But here's what's crucial. Orcas are also among the most ruthless predators on Earth. They hunt for sport, killing seals and then not eating them. They play with dying prey, tossing it between pack members for minutes before the final kill. They attack young whales to eat only the tongue, leaving the rest of the carcass. They have been observed hunting great white sharks, specifically to eat their livers, discarding the rest of the body. This isn't cruelty in the human sense. Orcas almost certainly don't conceptualize suffering the way we do, but it demonstrates that high intelligence and extreme predatory behavior aren't contradictory. You can be smart and ruthless. Cognitive sophistication doesn't automatically generate compassion. If Troodon descendants had evolved intelligence, they probably would have resembled orcas more than humans. Smart, social, cooperative within groups, and absolutely lethal toward anything designated as prey or competitor. Now let's return to the original question that's been hanging over this entire exploration. Why did the small theropods succeed for so long? The answer is beautifully simple. They optimized for adaptation rather than domination. Large predators optimize for overwhelming individual power. They evolve toward maximum size, maximum bite force, maximum intimidation. They're designed to win individual combat encounters through superior strength. This works in stable environments where prey species don't change much and resources are predictable. Small pack predators optimize for behavioral flexibility. They evolve toward enhanced cognition, better cooperation, more sophisticated communication. They're designed to win through tactics, coordination, and rapid adaptation to changing circumstances. This works across varying environments and remains effective even as prey evolves new defenses. The large predators are specialists in the game of individual combat. The small predators are generalists in the game of survival. And in evolution, generalism beats specialism over long timescales because environments change, prey evolves, and the ability to adapt is more valuable than current dominance. Tyrannosaurus was the most powerful land predator that ever lived. But it existed for 2.5 million years and then went extinct. The small theropods existed for 165 million years, 66 times longer, and only went extinct because a random asteroid impact destroyed the entire ecosystem. Even then, their descendants survived, adapted, and now number over 10,000 species. Success in evolution isn't measured by dominance in the moment. It's measured by persistence across time. And by that measure, the small killers weren't just successful, they were among the most successful animals ever to exist. This leads us to a profound realization about the nature of apex predation itself. The term apex predator implies a peak, a pinnacle, a position of unassailable dominance. But ecology doesn't have peaks. It has networks, systems, dynamic equilibria that shift constantly. The predator that appears dominant today may be a dead end tomorrow. The predator that appears marginal today may be the only survivor of the next extinction event. The small theropods understood this, or rather, evolution understood this on their behalf. By remaining small, they maintained flexibility. By hunting cooperatively, they could adjust pack size to prey availability. By developing intelligence, they could respond to novel challenges. They didn't optimize for any particular environment. They optimized for handling uncertainty. This is the fundamental lesson of their success. Adaptability beats power. Cooperation beats size. Intelligence beats strength. Not in every individual encounter. A Tyrannosaurus could certainly kill a Troodon in direct combat. But across millions of years, facing unpredictable challenges, experiencing climate shifts and ecosystem changes, and evolutionary arms races, the small, flexible predators outlasted the large, specialized ones every single time. The dinosaurs we remember, the giants that fill museums and star in films, were evolutionary dead ends. Magnificent, awe-inspiring dead ends, but dead ends nonetheless. The dinosaurs we ignore, the small, feathered predators that barely register as threats in our imaginations, were the main line, the successful experiment, the animals that actually won the game of survival. And they're still here. Flying overhead, perching on power lines, hopping across sidewalks. 10,000 species strong, descended from the most successful predatory lineage in Earth's history, carrying forward 230 million years of evolutionary refinement. We call them birds, and think of them as something separate from dinosaurs, something lesser. But they're not. They're the dinosaurs that survived by being better than the giants. Not stronger, not larger, but more adaptable, more cooperative, more intelligent. They're the proof that the smallest dinosaurs were always the deadliest. Not because they could win any individual fight, but because they could win the only fight that matters, the fight against extinction itself. Stand outside tonight. Look at the trees silhouetted against the sky. Watch the shadows moving through the branches. Probably a crow settling in for the night, or an owl beginning its hunting shift. You're watching the dinosaurs that conquered the world not through size, but through intelligence. The predators that hunted in packs while tyrannosaurs hunted alone. The killers that survived the asteroid because they were small enough, flexible enough, smart enough to adapt when everything else died. The age of dinosaurs never ended. It just changed its strategy. The giants fell, but the small assassins simply waited, adapted, and inherited an empty planet that they proceeded to fill with their descendants. 10,000 species of modern dinosaurs, every songbird, every raptor, every crow and parrot and penguin, all descended from the Mesozoic's most successful predators, all carrying forward the legacy of pack hunting, tool use, problem-solving, and behavioral flexibility that made their ancestors dominant for 165 million years. We think we live in the age of mammals, that we've somehow transcended the era of predatory dinosaurs. But look up. They're still there, more diverse than ever, more abundant than ever, more successful than they've ever been. The smallest dinosaurs were the deadliest because they understood what we're only beginning to learn. Survival isn't about being the strongest or the largest. It's about being smart enough, flexible enough, and cooperative enough to handle whatever the universe throws at you. The chicken-sized killers won. They always won. And 230 million years after they first appeared, they're still winning. The age of the small theropods never ended. We just stopped recognizing them as dinosaurs. But they remember. Every hunting flight, every coordinated pack attack, every problem solved and tool used. They remember, encoded in behavior patterns older than mountains, strategies refined across more generations than our minds can comprehend. And occasionally, when a crow looks at you with those black, intelligent eyes, calculating, considering, remembering your face for future reference, you remember too. You remember that you're looking at a dinosaur, a killer, the descendant of the most successful predators in Earth's history. And you realize, perhaps for the first time, they never stopped being dangerous. We just became too large for them to consider us prey. Lucky us.